I stood in front of 300 guests wearing the dress my sister-in-law said was a gift. When the flashbulbs went off, laughter erupted behind me. Everyone else wore haute couture. Me, a knockoff clown suit. Then that same woman smiling innocently pinned a $260,000 scandal on me. But I didn't break. I turned their final party into a stage for truth. If you think this is just another family drama, you're dead wrong. Hit subscribe now for more haunting, breathtaking storytelling films from us. Before that dress tore through every pretense, I truly believed that kindness alone would earn me a place in the family. The laughter was too rehearsed, too in sync. It bounced across the ballroom walls like porcelain thrown onto tile, sharp, fragile, and cold. I sat there in the center of 300 guests, dressed in diamonds and curated smiles, clutching the stem of my wineglass so tightly my knuckles went white. The air smelled of money and peonies. Every table was draped in imported ivory silk, every guest seated according to wealth, influence, or bloodline. I was the only thing out of place, and I could feel it. In their eyes, in their half-whispers, in the stifled chuckles whenever I shifted uncomfortably in my chair. They were all staring at me, or rather at my dress. It was supposed to be a gift, a gesture of inclusion. Vivian had sent it with a handwritten note, all flowing cursive and faux sisterhood, excited to officially welcome you into the Whitmore Circle, Lana. This will look stunning on you, trust me. Love, V. I did trust her, and now I was wearing a counterfeit knockoff among a sea of couture in front of photographers, investors, magazine editors, and socialites who could spot a fake from across a champagne fountain. A stylist brushed past me and smirked. A camera shutter clicked. A woman whispered behind a menu, "Who lets their future sister-in-law show up like that?" My name is Lana Myers. I'm 29, a self-made interior designer from Seattle. And this is the moment I realized I had walked into a family that didn't want a daughter-in-law. They wanted a scapegoat. But I didn't start here. 2 years ago, I was in my studio apartment on Capitol Hill, surrounded by fabric swatches, candle wax samples, and unpaid invoices. My mornings started with client emails and ended with sanding reclaimed wood for projects no one would see on Pinterest. I was proud of my work even when it was unglamorous, even when I had to trade weekends for deadlines and pay rent in 3 installments. I didn't need much, just space to create, peace to breathe, people I could trust. Then Caleb Whitmore walked into my life. It was an accidental meet-cute, the kind that screenwriters would have called too convenient. He was touring the penthouse unit of a downtown building I was consulting on. The developer was a nightmare, the floor plans outdated, and my temper thin. Caleb was the opposite. Calm, kind. He stood there in his tailored coat, watching me rearrange a model room with all the grace of a woman losing her last thread of patience. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer unsolicited opinions. He just waited, smiled, and said, "You make the space feel like it's lived in, not staged. That's rare." I laughed. He stayed. For coffee, then for dinner. Then for 3 consecutive weekends, helping me assemble vintage light fixtures for a bistro that couldn't afford an electrician. He was the kind of man who didn't flinch at calloused hands or a crowded workbench. I didn't know his last name until week 5. He introduced himself simply Caleb. He didn't name drop, didn't mention the trust funds or the resorts. I found out the way people like me always find out Googling after a mutual friend, whispered, "You do know who his father is, right? Roland Whitmore." The tycoon behind Whitmore escapes a luxury resort chain with properties in 7 countries, including private islands, alpine chalets, and an adults-only retreat that had a 19-month waitlist. The man was both hospitality royalty and Forbes front cover material. Caleb had grown up with summer tutors, personal chefs, and a lake house that doubled as a heliport. But none of it had translated into entitlement. He still opened doors. He still read paperbacks. He still offered to fix my leaky kitchen faucet with a YouTube tutorial and a lot of stubborn optimism. He was different, or maybe I just wanted to believe he was. The first time I met his family was over dinner at a golf club that required reservations a month in advance and had a valet for the valet. Vivian arrived 20 minutes late and didn't apologize. She gave me the kind of once-over you reserve for someone who just stepped on your Louboutin. She said I had a real-world charm, which I later learned was rich person code for not one of us. Their mother, Celeste, was more polite than warm. A woman of few expressions, but many pearls. She asked me about my business, then pivoted to how hard it must be to work without a safety net. Must keep you on your toes, she said, sipping imported mineral water from a crystal flute. Roland surprisingly was the most grounded. He didn't smile much, but he listened. When I spoke about my projects, he didn't look bored. When Caleb touched my hand under the table, he didn't flinch. But Vivian watched everything. Me, him, us, like she was waiting to pounce. 3 months later, Caleb proposed. Not with fanfare or fireworks. Just him, me, our favorite bookstore, and a small emerald-cut diamond ring that once belonged to his grandmother. I cried. I said yes. Vivian didn't. Not out loud. But her silence at the engagement dinner spoke volumes. She toasted with a smirk and a thinly veiled jab about modern brides and their minimalist tastes. Then came the email. Subject line. Let's make it official. Body text Hailana. With our families becoming one, I'd love for you to join us at my engagement party next month. It'll be a major event. 300 guests, press vendors, the works. I'd love for you to wear something special. Attached is a dress I picked, just a little something to make you feel like part of the Whitmore legacy. Let me know what you think. Warmly, V. At first I was touched, then wary. But Caleb encouraged me. She's trying, babe. It's her way of connecting. So I wore it. The night of the party, we arrived at the waterfront estate Vivian had rented out, complete with floating lanterns, live jazz, and valet parking for yachts. And then the stares started. It wasn't subtle. It never is in those circles. One woman whispered, "Is that polyester?" Another smirked. "She's brave. No one wears ready-to-wear anymore. Not to this event." Vivian, in her custom Dior gown, floated toward me with 2 flutes of champagne and a look so surgically polite it nearly split my spine. "You got the dress," she beamed. "You wear it so confidently." I swallowed the shame like acid, forced a smile. "Thanks for sending it." "Oh, it was nothing," she said, clinking glasses. "Nothing at all. I wanted to disappear." Caleb tried to distract me with conversation, but it was no use. My dress, cheap stitching, uneven seams fabric that shimmered just a little too loudly had already marked me. I was the outsider. I was the cautionary tale don't marry down. She'll bring polyester to a silk affair. As the night wore on, I stood by the edge of the patio, watching couples dance under chandeliers that swayed from imported olive trees. My glass was empty. My pride shattered, and then I saw it. Vivian whispering to a guest, gesturing subtly toward me. They both laughed. It wasn't misinterpreted. It wasn't imagined. It was calculated. That night I went home and found the tag still tucked in the seam of the dress. A name I didn't recognize. I searched it. It led to a knockoff designer on a fast fashion site. Retail price $64.99. My stomach dropped. I ripped the dress off like it was made of lies. That was the night I stopped trying to belong. And it was the night I started paying attention. Because in families like the Whitmores, cruelty doesn't scream. It smiles. It sends gifts. It hugs you with one hand while pocketing the blade in the other. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't yet imagine, was that this dress, this insult masquerading as generosity, was just the first move in a game I hadn't realized I was playing. But I would learn. Oh, I would learn. It wasn't just a party, it was a declaration. And I was the one being declared. The moment we stepped onto the marble patio of the Whitmore estate, I could feel it. Something shifted in the air. Not quite hostility worse. It was anticipation. The kind that buzzes beneath the surface of polite conversation. That moment when everyone knows a secret but you. The lights were soft but calculated, strung across handcrafted archways and suspended over a manicured garden that looked like it had been flown in from Tuscany. Jazz played low under the sounds of champagne corks and carefully orchestrated laughter. I should have been dazzled. I should have been nervous in a good way, but all I felt was watched. The dress clung to my skin like a dare. It shimmered a little too much. The neckline sat a fraction too sharp, the hem, a whisper too short. It didn't hug, it clung. There was nothing technically wrong with it, but everything about it was off. And in a crowd that measured status by the cut of your collarbone and the shade of your stitching off was enough. Caleb, as usual, was oblivious. He kissed my temple, adjusted his cufflinks, and led me into the lion's den like we were guests of honor. "Vivian's going to be so happy you wore it," he said, proud of what he thought was a sweet gesture from his sister. "She said it would complement your complexion." I didn't have the heart to tell him it complemented absolutely nothing but her ego. We entered the main courtyard and the heads turned almost in sync. It wasn't dramatic, just delayed. A slow ripple. One glance became two. A soft murmur began to bleed into the jazz. Someone raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. Another reached for their champagne with exaggerated grace, as if shielding their mouth. They saw it. They knew. I stood among couture-clad women, tailored silk hand-beaded gowns and custom atelier creations that cost more than a year of my rent, and I was in a dress that gleamed like cheap glitter under event lighting. Flash. A camera clicked near the hedges. Then another. Then laughter. Not loud, but loud enough. "Who's she again?" someone asked behind me. "That's Caleb's fiancée," another voice whispered with honeyed cruelty. Poor thing. Thought that was a statement dress. Turns out the statement was clearance. Vivian appeared at the top of the staircase like royalty descending from a kingdom built on curated perfection. Her gown was an architectural feat structured silk draped just so, with the kind of minimalist edge that screamed old money with modern menace. Her diamond earrings probably had their own insurance policy. "Oh, darling," she sang as she approached me. Her tone was wrapped in air kisses and expensive perfume. "You wore it." There was a pause a second too long. She took a sip of champagne and tilted her head eyes, scanning the bodice like she was appraising damage control, not style. "It lays differently than I expected," she murmured. But still, bold choice. A woman beside her chuckled. Caleb, ever the diplomat, raised his glass. "She looks incredible, doesn't she?" Vivian's eyes didn't leave mine. "Incredible," she echoed. And then with a smile so precise it could cut glass, confidence can elevate anything. It wasn't a compliment. It was a weapon with velvet trim. I laughed politely. My voice barely made it past my lips. Inside I was boiling. Not with shame. Not yet. That would come later. First came the disbelief, the wondering, the quiet unraveling of trust. Had she really? No, she wouldn't! But every glance, every whisper, every step I took through the garden made it harder to believe otherwise. Even the staff looked at me twice. One server accidentally bumped me eyes, darting to my neckline, then quickly away. Another offered me sparkling water and said, "Don't worry, miss. You're brave to wear something like that." Brave. Not beautiful, not elegant, not radiant. Brave. I excused myself and went to the powder room. The mirror didn't lie. It wasn't just a cheap dress, it was a trap. The seams were uneven, the stitching was loose near the hem, the tag inside still tucked into the lining had no designer name, just a serial number that looked suspiciously like a batch code. My throat tightened. I opened my phone, searched the code. The link led me to an online boutique infamous for knockoffs. Inspired by Runway was their tagline. It wasn't even a good fake. $64. I stood there surrounded by marble and scented candles that probably cost more than the dress, feeling like I'd been stripped naked. And the worst part, I had smiled. I had thanked her. I had trusted that behind all the cold perfection behind the air kisses and over-polished grace was a sister-in-law trying however clumsily to make me feel welcome. I was wrong. Back outside, the party was in full swing. A string quartet played something slow and expensive. Vivian posed with guests under an arch of imported roses. Caleb was at the bar chatting with a man in a tux who probably owned 3 private jets. I joined him, trying to suppress the tremble in my fingers. "Hey," he said, brushing hair from my cheek. "You okay?" I nodded. He smiled. "You're glowing." I swallowed hard. "It's probably the dress. It reflects everything." He laughed, not catching the barb. And that was the moment I knew he had no idea. Not about the dress, not about his sister, not about the rules I was being forced to play by. He loved me. That part I never questioned. But he was blind to the game and blind to the damage it was already doing. Dinner was announced. Guests filed into the garden pavilion where chandeliers swayed in the breeze and gold-rimmed place cards spelled out family names like royalty. Mine simply said L. Myers. No fiancé off, no soon-to-be. Just a reminder I wasn't one of them. At the head table, Vivian made a speech. It was graceful. Dramatic. She thanked every guest for celebrating her engagement, toasted to love and legacy, and then midway through her carefully memorized prose, she paused. Her eyes swept the crowd. "Tonight is about inclusion," she said, "about embracing all the people who will shape our family's future, even the ones who come from surprising places." A chuckle spread through the crowd. I felt the blood drain from my face. "I always say," she continued, "style is not about money. It's about knowing who you are and being brave enough to wear it." Laughter, applause. Her eyes locked on mine. I didn't clap. I didn't cry. I just sat there frozen in polyester and humiliation, praying the night would end before I did. Later, as the fireworks bloomed over the lake and guests took selfies against the glowing sky, Caleb kissed me again. "Wasn't that beautiful?" "Yes," I whispered. But I wasn't talking about the fireworks. I was talking about the moment I saw Vivian for what she really was. Not just cold. Calculated. She hadn't just set a trap. She'd lit it on fire and invited the whole city to watch me burn. And I had smiled for the cameras. But the ashes were mine to gather. And next time I wouldn't come unarmed. 2 weeks after the dress. That's how I counted time back then, not in days or calendar weeks, but in humiliations. The dress had come and gone, but its ripples stayed. Every interaction with the Whitmores since then felt like walking into a room already staged for my failure. And I had grown quiet. Not bitter, just sharper, more watchful. So when Vivian called me one Wednesday morning and opened the conversation with "Hey Lan, I have a favor to ask," I didn't answer right away. She didn't notice the pause. "We're planning something special for Dad's 70th, she continued breezily, as though she hadn't thrown me under a chandelier-lit bus at her engagement party, and I thought of you immediately. Immediately. That word stuck. "I'm flattered," I said cautiously, balancing my phone between shoulder and cheek while sifting through samples of hand-dyed Moroccan linens on my studio floor. What kind of something? A celebration, but tasteful, intimate, impactful, legacy-worthy. Legacy. Another word they threw around like confetti. The Whitmore brand didn't just sell experiences, it sold immortality repackaged in wellness retreats and curated bamboo forests. Legacy was their favorite performance. "I'd like you to design the event," she added. You have that grounded creativity that Dad really appreciates. Grounded creativity, that was rich. But I bit down the sarcasm. My mouth tasted like ambition. Because here's the truth, I wanted the project. I wanted to build something for once, not defend myself against it. I wanted to be more than Caleb's fiancée or the one in the wrong dress. So I said yes. God help me, I said yes. Vivian scheduled a briefing at her place in Queen Anne that Saturday. I arrived 10 minutes early and still found her in a silk robe sipping matcha from a glass so thin it looked like fog suspended in midair. She waved me in. "Excuse the chaos, just wrapped up a call with the agency." You know how PR people are, obsessed with details. I blinked. "Agency? Oh, didn't I mention?" she said, already turning on her heels. "We brought on Ardent & Co. just for logistical support. You're the vision." Right. She led me into her home office, an over-designed shrine of marble and mohair, and motioned toward a mood board on the wall. It was massive and very not intimate. A color palette of gold, glacier blue, and bone white. A guest list pushing 200. Sections labeled Fireworks Drone Show Immersive Media Tunnel, Napa Vineyard Tasting Experience. There were sketches of suspended botanical chandeliers, a floating stage for live string quartets, even a mock-up of a custom ice sculpture bearing the Whitmore crest. "Tell me what you think," she beamed as if none of this was premeditated. "You'll bring it to life, right?" I stared at the board, my throat tightening. This wasn't a celebration. It was a production. "This is ambitious," I said carefully. Vivian took a seat, crossing her legs like a news anchor. "It has to be. Dad built a hospitality empire. His 70th can't look like a retirement luncheon." I sat opposite her, still trying to catch up. "So, where do I come in exactly?" "You're creative director," she said. "Concept. Decor. Guest experience. Ardent's doing logistics and social media. But the vision needs to come from the family. That's why I brought you in. You are family now, aren't you?" I smiled. But inside something splintered. She hadn't brought me in. She'd brought me under. Under her name. Under her thumb. Under a budget I hadn't seen and expectations I hadn't set. Still I nodded. Because the truth was, I needed the win. My design firm had been surviving, not thriving. One Whitmore-branded event could mean 6 new clients. 10. A year's worth of security. I began sketching that night. I stayed up until 3 a.m., crafting concepts that balanced restraint and spectacle. I told myself I could steer the ship, that I could find beauty in the madness, that I could make it mine. I was wrong. Within days, Ardent & Company began flooding my inbox. Budget spreadsheets, vendor proposals, timeline outlines. Vivian looped me into every email but responded on her own terms, usually with phrases like, "Approved, make it pop," or "Lana will figure it out." Vendors stopped addressing me directly. PR reps referred to me as Vivian's liaison. Photographers asked about shot lists I'd never seen. The guest list swelled to 280. The budget a whisper at first, then a scream. I tried to flag it early. "Vivian." I called one evening, pulling up an Excel sheet that looked like a Bond villain's ransom note. "The projections have crossed 230K. That's not including final build costs or contingency." She sighed. "It's Dad's 70th, Lana. He's worth billions. Let's not pinch pennies." "It's not about pennies," I said. "It's about transparency. Who's signing off on these costs?" "I assumed Caleb told you," she said, voice light. "The siblings are covering the bill. Equal parts. Caleb, me, and our trust. It's already settled." Settled, except it wasn't. I hadn't seen Caleb's signature anywhere, and when I asked him about it over dinner that night, just a casual question between 2 bites of grilled salmon. He blinked. She said what he asked. That the 3 of you are splitting costs, equally, as in 80K each. Caleb set his fork down. "That's a lot," he admitted. "I mean, yeah, I assumed we'd chip in. But I thought it was symbolic. A token, not a down payment on a private island." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She's steamrolling you," I said. "She's trying to make it special," he replied. "Dad's milestone, you know. She's making it hers," I countered. He exhaled. "Vivian's intense, but she means well." There it was again. That excuse. That soft shrug of familial forgiveness that only people born into power seem to be able to afford. "What about what I mean?" I asked quietly. Caleb reached across the table. His fingers curled around mine, but his eyes stayed down. "I'll talk to her," he said. But he didn't. Not really. A week later, I was in a warehouse on the edge of Redmond reviewing floral installations with a vendor who kept calling me Miss Lana like I was a sorority intern. A clipboard girl from Ardent told me we'd need to revise the lighting budget upward due to drone synchronization. I asked who approved that. She said Vivian, of course. I asked who was paying for that. She blinked. "Well, you, I guess." That night, I found the courage to ask Caleb again. "I'm doing all the work I said, all the sketches, vendor coordination, site inspections, and now I'm expected to pay into a budget I never approved." "I get it," he said. "I'll transfer some funds to your account. We'll cover our share." "That's not the point," I snapped. He looked at me wounded. "Then what is—" I stood in our kitchen, surrounded by fabric samples and wine glasses, and realized he didn't see the trap. He didn't even know the rules of the game. "She's not just testing me," I said. "She's using me." Caleb looked away. And that told me everything. He loved me. I didn't doubt that. But love without understanding, it doesn't shelter you. It leaves you exposed. Vivian knew exactly what she was doing. And Caleb, he was just collateral. So I went back to my studio. And I started printing everything. Every invoice. Every email chain. Every digital receipt and message that showed how I'd been framed to take the fall for an event I didn't authorize yet couldn't walk away from. I didn't know how. Not yet. But I knew one thing. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. And I would control the finale. The numbers didn't lie. But they didn't tell the truth either. I was sitting at the long walnut table in my studio, surrounded by scatterings of gold-trimmed mood boards and half-drunk coffee when I saw it tucked between a floral invoice and a lighting proposal. It was small, almost harmless. Just a line item labeled Venue Upgrade. Tier 3 package with a total that made my jaw tighten. Tier 3. There was no Tier 3. I remembered that meeting Vivian rejecting the top-tier upgrades for being too flashy, insisting on Tier 2, and complimenting my modest instincts. She'd made a whole show of it in front of Ardent's junior associate, reminding everyone that her father valued elegance without waste. So why was there an extra $1,700 to $500 attached to the venue line now? I scrolled back through emails. The original proposal was right there in my inbox, Tier 2 confirmed, approved by Vivian. Her actual reply perfect. Tier 3 would have been vulgar. And yet, here we were. I checked the floral contract next. Then the lighting. Then the entertainment budget. Bit by bit, the ceiling lifted, or rather, inflated. Silent, calculated inflation on almost every major item. Thousands here, several more there. Like someone was adding pennies to a jar they didn't think anyone would count. And in the corner of each updated PDF, barely noticeable, was a name in the project contact field. Mine, L. Myers. Suddenly the cold in the room wasn't from the Seattle rain tapping against the windows, it was internal. A frost moving through my spine. A kind of chill you only get when you realize someone's building a fire around you and preparing to strike the match. I printed the documents, highlighted the inconsistencies. I didn't even know what I was planning to do with them yet. I just needed proof that I wasn't imagining it, that I wasn't paranoid. Because doubt has a voice. It sounds like your worst critic with your own mouth. And mine whispered, "Maybe you missed something. Maybe this is how big events work. Maybe you're overreacting again." But I wasn't. And I knew it when the next call came from the catering team. "Hi, Lana," the voice chirped. "Just confirming we're doubling the hors d'oeuvres for the early guest tier." I blinked. Doubling? "Yes, per the updated memo from you last night." I didn't send a memo. There was a pause. Paper rustled on their end. "Oh, it came from your event address, Lana de Whitmore event at ardentcollab.com. I felt my stomach twist. I didn't create that address. I had never even heard of it. Could you forward that memo to my actual email? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Of course. Want me to CC Vivian too? No, I said quickly. Just me. They hung up. And I sat back in the chair like I'd been hit. That email clearly fabricated to look like mine had been used to authorize changes I never saw. Which meant someone was making decisions under my name. Which meant someone was planning deliberately to leave me holding the bag when the invoices dropped. Vivian. Of course it was Vivian. But suspicion isn't enough in their world. In the Whitmore orbit, nothing exists until it's been perfectly printed, notarized, and smiled about over rosé. If I wanted to survive this, I needed receipts. And not just the kind you file away in folders. The real kind, the weaponized kind. That was when Maya found me. Maya was an assistant for Ardent. 20-something, overworked, the kind of person who survived on coffee and apology emails. She looked like someone who'd learned how to be invisible by age 10 and never unlearned it. She appeared outside my studio on a Tuesday afternoon like a ghost in linen. "Can I talk to you?" she asked, clutching a folder against her chest like it might run away. "Sure," I said, motioning her in. She didn't sit. Instead, she placed the folder on the table and took one shaky breath. "I wasn't supposed to print this," she said. "But I did, and I kept it. Because something didn't feel right." I opened the folder slowly. It was the original budget matrix, dated 3 months prior, with Vivian's signature across the bottom, every line item lower. Accurate, transparent. The same categories I'd been accused of escalating were clearly pre-approved by her with comments like, "Bump this for optics and add champagne tier for visuals." She had signed off on every excess before I ever touched the project. And now, she was rewriting history with my name stamped on the blame. I looked up at Maya. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I've been where you are," she said. "Just not with this many zeros." I wanted to hug her. Instead, I asked, "Can I count on you if this goes further?" She hesitated. Then she nodded. "I don't want to be part of this circus anymore." And just like that, I wasn't alone. Not completely, but alone enough. Because when I told Caleb, he didn't say what I needed to hear. He said, "You're probably overthinking it." He said Vivian's stressed. He said, "You're reading too much into business emails." And I realized maybe for the first time with absolute clarity that love wasn't always enough. Not when it came wrapped in denial. So I stopped explaining. I started collecting. I created folders, screenshots, voice memos, every passive-aggressive text, every edited invoice, every time she changed a menu item or shifted a vendor quote and pretended it was collaboration. I forwarded emails to myself. I recorded meetings on my phone silently, guiltlessly, because I knew how this story ended if I didn't. They'd say I overreached, that I lacked experience, that I was emotional, that I ruined the event. They'd bury me in smiles and branded hashtags. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not again. Not like the dress. Not like the party. Not like that moment under the chandeliers when I realized my name would never mean anything in this family unless I gave it weight. So I worked in silence. I worked in armor. And every time I saw Vivian's name pop into my inbox, I didn't flinch. I filed. I watched. I waited. Because power wasn't always loud. Sometimes it lived in the shadows. Sometimes it looked like a USB drive tucked in a flower arrangement. And sometimes it looked like the quietest woman in the room standing in just the right place, waiting for the lights to turn. I didn't know what the plan was yet, but the story, the real story, it was starting to write itself. And this time, I wasn't going to be the punchline. It started with a calendar notification. Family review meeting, final budget. Just like that. Casual, clean, a line of digital ink hiding a blade underneath. I didn't ask questions. I showed up. Vivian had scheduled the meeting at the Whitmore penthouse top floor of a glass monolith that overlooked Elliott Bay like it owned the tides. I wore black. Not because it was slimming or elegant, but because it felt like armor. The kind of color you wear when you expect blood on the floor by the end. Caleb and I arrived together, but his hand didn't reach for mine once in the elevator. His shoulders were tight. He was trying to stay neutral, which meant he wasn't on my side. The moment we walked into the living room, I knew it wasn't a meeting, it was a trial. Vivian was already seated, legs crossed, notes neatly stacked beside her. Celeste, my mother-in-law-to-be, stood near the fireplace, turning a crystal paperweight in her hands like she was meditating. And Roland sat at the head of the long dining table, face unreadable, his scotch sweating onto a coaster made of Italian leather. "Let's get started, Vivian," said her voice bright like she was hosting a brunch segment on television. No greetings, no hugs, just position. She opened a folder, one I hadn't seen, and began distributing printed spreadsheets like evidence. "These are the updated totals as of this morning," she said, "including catering overages, entertainment adjustments, and venue logistics." I glanced down at the document. 262, 580, 84. The number hit me like a punch. Even though I had seen versions of it building stacked quietly in the dark corners of budgets, it wasn't real until it was printed. Until it sat there in Helvetica Neue staring back at me like a verdict. Vivian sighed. "Obviously this isn't ideal. It's not what we anticipated." Roland leaned forward. "Over $250,000 for a birthday dinner." "It's not just a dinner," Dad Vivian replied. "It's a legacy moment." "Don't start with that word again," he snapped. Vivian held up her hands like she was the voice of reason. "Look, I was under the impression that Lana had final say on design and vendor agreements." I didn't speak, not yet. I mean, she continued, feigning innocence so thin I could hear the strain behind her lashes. "You were the point of contact on all documents, Lana, weren't you?" All heads turned to me. My chest burned. "Yes," I said quietly, "but the versions I approved were within our original scope. Many of these additions were made after the fact, or through an address I didn't authorize." Roland frowned. "An address?" "She means the event email we set up," Vivian cut in quickly. "Standard Ardent protocol." "An address I didn't control," I said, sharper now. "Edits were made without my sign-off." Vivian blinked at me. "Well, I wasn't aware of that." She said it like a mother catching a toddler scribbling on the wall. Surprised, but not really. Disappointed, but gently patronizing. Then she turned to Roland, sighing like a martyr. "Look, I don't want this to become messy, but if things weren't tracked properly, I think it's fair to say some oversight happened on Lana's end." I opened my mouth, but Celeste beat me to it. "How did we get here?" she asked, voice soft but sharp. "Why is a simple celebration for a 70-year-old man being treated like a royal coronation?" Vivian gave her a small, polished smile. "Because he deserves it." "He deserves truth," Celeste replied, "not theatrics." Roland raised a hand. "Enough," he said. "What I want to know is who approved this number." The silence hung like smoke. Then Vivian looked at me, and she said the words I will never forget. "I think Lana should take responsibility. She's the creative lead. And as she reminded me more than once, she wanted this to be her moment to prove herself." I felt the room twist. The floor slid an inch under my feet. My hands tingled. Caleb was still. Then slowly he turned to me. His eyes weren't angry. They were worse. They were disappointed. "Is this true?" he asked. "You never told me it got this far." "It didn't," I said. "Not until someone else started manipulating the numbers." Vivian made a sympathetic noise. "Oh, come on. Let's not go there." "Where is there?" I asked. "Facts, accountability." Roland looked at me. His voice was calm but lined with steel. "I trusted you with this, Lana. My daughter trusted you." My mouth opened. No words came. Celeste didn't speak. She turned her face toward the window, the afternoon sun casting her in golden light that didn't reach her eyes. That silence, that was the loudest sound I had ever heard. We left without resolution. There wasn't supposed to be one. The meeting had been staged for one purpose: to mark me. To let everyone know who would carry the weight if this went wrong. Who would be the name whispered at galas and behind menus? Not Vivian. Not the daughter of the Empire. Me. That night, Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, quiet. "I just wish you'd told me sooner," he said. "I tried," I said. "You didn't want to see it." He didn't argue, which told me he knew I was right. But still, he didn't stand up for me. He didn't fight. And that's when I understood something I hadn't before. There are two kinds of silence. The one you choose to stay composed, and the one that's forced on you when you realize your voice will never be enough for the people you thought would protect you. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I did something worse. I sat in the dark, and I planned. I pulled out my laptop, my notebooks, my USB drives. I listened to every voice memo, every recorded call, every time Vivian's voice sounded too polished to be honest. I matched spreadsheets to email timestamps. I highlighted gaps. I created timelines. I cataloged tone shifts. And I realized something deeper than any line item. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't extravagance gone wild. It was design. Vivian had orchestrated this like an aria. She'd pulled me in, lifted me up, fed me false authority, and then when the moment came, she stepped back and let the shadow fall across my name. I was supposed to break under this. I was supposed to disappear, maybe even run, but I didn't. Because the only thing more dangerous than a woman who's been humiliated is one who's found the proof. And I had everything. I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet. But I knew this. The birthday celebration was in 3 weeks. And when the lights went up that night, the real show would begin. Not hers. Mine. From the moment I stepped into the lobby of the Whitmore Summit Resort, I could feel the temperature drop not in degrees, but in tension. The birthday gala wasn't an event. It was a spectacle. A full-scale, meticulously engineered performance that only people like Vivian could manufacture, a fusion of ego, legacy, and excess. Everything shimmered. Chandeliers floated like constellations over a marble ballroom floor. Each guest was handed a flute of custom-labeled champagne before they even stepped through the second set of doors. The lighting was warm golden, flattering to skin and ambition alike. The guest list, a curated ecosystem of relevant CEOs from luxury travel firms, board members from international hotel chains, editors from Wanderlust weekly influencers flown in from Monaco just to post spontaneous photos against the sea glass backdrop. Vivian had done everything to make the night unforgettable. She just didn't know how unforgettable it would become. I stood at the far end of the ballroom, my black jumpsuit tailored to the inch. I wasn't here to blend in. I wasn't here to look elegant or appropriate. I was here to deliver something Vivian never expected. The truth. She was everywhere, air-kissing donors posing beside her father's portrait, printed across a 10-foot silk banner, laughing that practiced laugh she wore like a designer brooch. She looked untouchable. But even diamonds crack under pressure, especially when someone knows where to tap. The first hint of fracture came at 8:15. The program was running exactly on Vivian time TM, choreographed to the second. The dinner had been served, the wine pairings announced by an imported sommelier, and the string quartet had just shifted from Debussy to a subtle arrangement of Coldplay. Then the lights dimmed for the slideshow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian's voice chimed through the mic, honey-coated and razor-edged on behalf of our family. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the man whose vision, generosity, and integrity built not just a brand, but a legacy." Polite applause, camera flashes. She continued, "It's impossible to encapsulate my father's greatness in a few photos, but we've done our best. Please enjoy this small tribute to the man behind it all." The screen flickered to life. Photos of Roland appeared, some vintage, some black and white, some lifted from old Whitmore brochures. Him shaking hands in Bali, overseeing construction in Napa, laughing with staff in Fiji. Smiles, nostalgia, exactly as planned, until slide 32. The screen froze just for a second. A heartbeat. Then, a different email interface appeared. Zoomed-in text. A signature Vivian Whitmore. The font was unmistakable. Add champagne tier for optics. No need to run it by L. A murmur rustled across the tables. Next slide. A vendor email, "Hi Lana, confirming the drone order increase per Vivian's request yesterday." Another slide. A private text thread. Vivian let her drown in the numbers. She wanted the spotlight, let her burn under it. Someone gasped. Another guest laughed nervously. Vivian stood frozen at the podium, her face pale beneath flawless foundation. "Excuse me," she said, stepping back, eyes darting toward the AV booth. But it kept playing. Clips from voice memos. Her voice unmistakable, overlaying photos of budget spreadsheets, calendar invites, time-stamped edits. She was caught not in a single error, but a system of manipulation. And then came the closing slide. Curated by Lana Myers. Creative lead. Silence. A devastating, elegant silence. The screen faded to black. The ballroom, now dimmed in soft amber light, was a pressure cooker. Vivian turned slowly, scanning the crowd. For an instant, her gaze locked with mine across the room. And something flickered. Not rage. Not humiliation. Recognition. She knew. Finally. She wasn't the only one who knew how to stage a moment. Applause didn't come. Not right away. Instead came tension, raw buzzing. Conversations began bubbling. A reporter from Luxury Latitude raised her phone discreetly. A camera crew from a travel documentary whispered excitedly into a mic. The press had smelled blood. Roland stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor, the weight of 70 years in his posture. He didn't look angry. He looked betrayed. "Vivian," he said. "Just her name. Nothing more." She opened her mouth, but no sound came. I stepped forward. Not to the stage, just to the center aisle. I didn't need a microphone. The room was listening. "I didn't intend for this to happen tonight," I said, calm, measured. "But I also didn't intend to be framed for a $250,000 mistake. Every choice that ballooned this event into what it is was made without transparency, and every consequence was assigned to me." Vivian tried to cut in. "You're twisting?" "No," I said, sharper now. "I'm documenting. Something you're familiar with, I'm sure." A wave of tension rippled through the room like the echo of a dropped glass. A woman from the Tourism Alliance stood up. "We saw that text. You wanted her ruined." Vivian's mouth opened, then shut. Another voice near the back. "And yet she delivered this. That's power." Cameras were no longer discreet. One crew stepped forward, clearly preparing a segment for their weekend show. Caleb approached me quietly from the side, his face white. "You did this." "I had to," I whispered. He looked down. Not in shame. In realization. Roland moved toward the mic, clearing his throat. "This night was meant to celebrate vision," he said. "And I think we just witnessed it." Vivian paled. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. "I don't know who authorized this switch," she said. "There was a mix-up." "Don't," Roland cut her off. "Not tonight." His voice wasn't angry. It was something worse. Final. Vivian turned and walked off the stage, her heels striking like gunshots on marble. As she passed me, she didn't speak, but her eyes did. And what they said was clear: "I never thought you had it in you." But I did. I always did. She just never asked. Guests began murmuring again, this time not in scandal but in curiosity. Who was I? Where did I come from? Was this a setup or a masterclass? I didn't care. Because for once, the narrative wasn't written for me. It was written by me. Vivian had crafted a world where perfection masked cruelty, where appearance crushed truth, where silence was survival and status was everything. But tonight she met a different kind of enemy, one who didn't shout, one who waited, one who learned her rules and rewrote them. By the time the lights returned to full glow, the damage had been done. But so had the shift. My name, once whispered with pity, was now spoken with a different tone. One part respect, one part warning. And as the room turned toward the dessert bar and the music resumed, I stepped into a version of myself I hadn't known I was building. The one who didn't just survive the fire. She lit it. It only took one breath. One ragged, shaking breath from Vivian before the whole illusion collapsed. She stepped back onto the stage like she had something holy to defend, her designer heels clicking on the polished floor like war drums. Her face, usually a mask of serene high society indifference, was cracked now. panic bled through her expression. And when she finally spoke, her voice wasn't smooth or polished or camera-ready. It was raw. "You manipulated that footage." The room froze again. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered in the air. Even the string quartet, unsure of their cue, fell silent. She pointed at me, arm trembling, eyes wide. "You edited those emails. You twisted my words to make me look like some kind of monster." I didn't flinch, because in that moment I realized this wasn't her fighting for her dignity. This was her fighting for control. For the version of herself that had always won. The version that lived in whispered compliments and fake humility. The one that never expected to be unmasked in front of her own kingdom. I walked toward the stage. Not rushed, not defiant, just steady. Caleb tried to intercept me halfway. "Lana, maybe just let it." "No," I said quietly, brushing past him. "Not this time." I stepped onto the stage, heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. The ballroom lights above me burned hot. 100 eyes followed me up the stairs. Vivian turned toward me, disbelief on her face because I was supposed to stay quiet. I always had. Not tonight. I walked to the center and took the microphone from the stand. It wasn't even shaking in my hand. "My name is Lana Myers," I said, voice low, breath tight. "And I didn't come here tonight to embarrass anyone. I didn't come to destroy a family. I came to defend myself." A hush spread across the room like a tide going out. "For weeks I was blamed for something I didn't do." I continued. "I was accused of inflating budgets, mismanaging vendors, sabotaging the event that I gave my time, my reputation, and my name to. Privately, I tried to speak. I tried to explain. No one listened. I turned to Vivian, so I made sure the truth did." Vivian's laugh was dry, bitter. "You're trying to spin this like you're the victim. You hacked private emails. You set me up in front of my friends, my family. This isn't a setup I cut in. It's an unveiling. And I didn't have to hack anything. I kept receipts because I knew you were never going to take accountability." Vivian stepped closer. "You think this earns you respect? You think burning the whole house down gives you some kind of nobility?" I faced her. No. But letting it burn quietly wasn't an option anymore. From the edge of the ballroom, a voice called out, "Let her speak." It came from a man in a navy tuxedo standing near the main exit. He stepped forward slowly, his presence cutting through the room like a blade through fog. I recognized him vaguely from a pitch meeting a few months back. Grayson Bell, one of the key investors behind the Whitmore Resort expansion in Portugal. Quiet, powerful, ruthlessly observant. "If she didn't say something," he continued, "who would be next?" Vivian blinked. "Excuse me." He moved closer, not smiling. "I've seen women like you in every boardroom, every gala, every negotiation. You weaponize grace. You hide behind heritage. But you don't lead. You manage perception. And when someone threatens it, someone you can't control, you punish them." A sharp inhale echoed from a nearby table. Roland stood now, not to stop anyone, not yet. Grayson continued. "If Lana hadn't gathered proof, she would have been buried under this night. Silently. And all of us would have toasted to it." He turned toward Roland. "Are those the values you built this empire on?" The room was a minefield of silence and shock. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Roland didn't answer immediately. He walked to the stage slowly. A man not rushed but changed. His face was taut lips pressed into a line so thin it looked like a scar. He looked at me, then at his daughter. "I've spent 40 years building something out of nothing," he said. "And I've watched my name become more than I ever imagined. But tonight," he paused, voice low, "tonight I saw what happens when legacy is twisted into entitlement." Vivian's mouth opened, but no sound came. "You told me this party was about honoring me," Roland continued. "But really it was about preserving you, your image, your performance, your control." He turned to the crowd. "Do you all know how Vivian pitched this event to me?" he said, looking around. "She said it would be elegant restraint. A tasteful tribute, nothing excessive. Then he gestured toward the grand chandeliers, the floating floral arches, the imported silk chair coverings embroidered with the Whitmore crest. This isn't restraint, it's spectacle, built on someone else's silence. Vivian's face had gone pale. I don't know what kind of empire you thought you were protecting, Roland said softer now. But if it's built on this, it's already rotting. He turned back to me. And as for you, Lana, I held my breath. I may not agree with how you did it, but I understand why you did. And you were right. If we hadn't heard the truth tonight, we never would have looked for it. His words dropped into me like water into dry earth. Beside him, Celeste stood. She had been silent the entire night, observing from the shadows as always. But now she stepped forward and placed her hand lightly on my shoulder. You shouldn't have had to fight this hard just to be seen, she said. That's on all of us. Vivian stepped back, jaw clenched. So that's it. You're just going to take her side? No, Roland said. I'm taking the side of truth. He looked to security, two suited men standing discreetly near the back. Escort Miss Whitmore to the green room. This discussion isn't over, but this event is. The guards moved toward her. Not aggressively, just enough to remind her the stage no longer belonged to her. I am this family, she said, voice shaking. You were, Roland replied, until you decided to be its executioner instead. They guided her off stage. And then the impossible happened. The room applauded, not wildly, not out of joy, but like an exhale, like a collective letting go of something toxic that had lingered too long. I stepped off the stage, slowly, my legs somehow still beneath me. Caleb met me halfway this time, his eyes weren't confused. They were reverent. I should have listened, he said quietly. I didn't want you to, I replied. Not until I was ready to speak for myself. He nodded, and said nothing more. Because finally, the silence belonged to me. I didn't expect to wake up to my own face on 5 different news apps. I didn't expect the video shot from someone's phone near the dessert table, slightly tilted audio spiking, when Vivian screamed to be the one thing that finally gave me a voice the whole world could hear. But that's how it started. At 5:47 a.m., the clip was posted anonymously to a wedding gossip subreddit. By 6:20, it was trending on Twitter. By 800, the hashtags were everywhere. Our faux gown gate, the trap dress, our Vivian vs Lana, Whitmore, whispers. And by 900, a local lifestyle reporter went live with the headline that turned a family betrayal into a public reckoning, the trap dress and the daughter-in-law who outsmarted Seattle high society. The article wasn't kind, but it wasn't cruel either. It was something worse for people like Vivian Precise. Every quote, every frame, every name, it all matched the truth too closely to deny. I sat on the couch, still in my robe, watching as the story I tried so hard to survive became a clickbait narrative for millions. I should have felt vindicated, maybe even powerful. But instead I just felt raw. Like I'd peeled off my skin in public only to have everyone point at the bones. Across from me, Caleb stood holding his phone, white-knuckled, unreadable. He'd been quiet all morning, flipping through the coverage, scrolling past the comments, pausing only when a headline made him wince. Lana, he said slowly, as if the words hurt. I looked at him, his jaw clenched. You really fought this alone. I didn't reply. He took a breath. I thought I was protecting you by staying neutral, by not choosing sides. I still didn't speak. Turns out, he said, voice breaking slightly, that was choosing a side. Now I looked at him. And for the first time since the night of the party, I didn't feel anger. I just felt tired. I needed you to believe me, I said softly. Not because I'm your wife, but because I was telling the truth. Caleb sat down beside me. I didn't know how deep Vivian would go. I thought it was just sibling drama. A few jabs, nothing like this. You didn't want to see it, I corrected him. None of you did. He nodded, and for once he did not argue. He just sat there, quiet, absorbing it all. At 11:00 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from someone I didn't expect. Roland Whitmore. Lana, conference room, noon, just you. I stared at the text for a full 30 seconds, heart hammering again, though not out of fear. This time it was anticipation. Maybe something was finally shifting. I arrived at the Whitmore Group's headquarters 15 minutes early. The receptionist didn't meet my eye. The executive assistant offered me water with a forced smile. And when I walked past the boardroom glass wall, I saw them, the entire leadership team, seated silent, some holding printouts of tweets. They weren't looking at me. They were waiting. At 12:01, Roland walked in. No tie, sleeves rolled, jaw locked. Behind him, Caleb followed but took a seat at the edge, not beside his father. Roland didn't speak right away. He stood at the head of the table, laid down a thin folder, and looked directly at me. "I made a mistake," he began. The words hung in the room like thunder that hadn't cracked yet. I assumed my daughter's ambition was harmless, that her drama would stay inside the family, that our name was too polished to ever stain. He tapped the folder. That was pride talking, and pride has a cost. He gestured to the folder. "These are all the major outlets who have reached out for comment. 3 national morning shows, 2 travel magazines, 1 lawsuit threat." My stomach clenched. "We're not here to bury the story," he said. "We're here to learn from it." A murmur passed through the room. Roland continued. "Effective immediately, Vivian is removed from all event operations, internal and external. Her team is disbanded. Her access to corporate accounts is suspended, and her name will not appear in any branding until a full audit is completed." He turned to me again. "And we'd like you to take over the visual brand direction for the Whitmore Legacy Project." It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "We want you," he said, "to rebuild what Vivian broke, not just the image, the trust." I blinked. This wasn't just a gesture. This was a reparation. I looked around the room. Half the team was watching me with cautious respect. The other half looked wary, but no one spoke against it. Caleb stood now. "I support this," he said. Roland didn't nod. He just said, "Then earn it." He walked out. The room cleared. Only Caleb stayed behind. "You don't have to forgive me," he said, "but I'll show up now, whatever that takes." I looked at him for a long moment. And then finally, "I'm not asking for perfect," I whispered, "just present." He nodded, and we left the room. Together, but for the first time, I was leading. The offer was real. So was the weight behind it. I stood in front of the mirrored walls of my small design studio. 3 days later, Roland's proposal folder still unopened on my desk, asking myself a question I thought I'd already answered. Was staying strength or was it surrender? Because the truth was walking away would have been easy now. With the headlines, with the video, with public sympathy on my side, I could have left in a blaze of poetic justice. I could have gone viral, booked interviews, started my own design line under the slogan, "The trap dress that broke the dynasty." But none of that would have changed the walls inside that boardroom. The culture, the silence, the layers of power that allowed someone like Vivian to build a minefield and call it a legacy. So I made my decision. I didn't want to walk away in flames. I wanted to stay and redesign the foundation. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, I walked into the Whitmore Group headquarters, not as a wife, not as a victim, not as a PR scandal, but as the newly appointed director of brand reclamation. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same building where I'd been ignored, dismissed politely, excluded from meetings with subtle smiles and stiff prosecco. The same boardroom where Vivian once called my color palette pedestrian. Now my first directive: undo everything she'd built. Vivian didn't show up that week. Not once. No emails, no notes, no formal resignation. Just a quiet vacuum where her perfume used to linger in the elevator. The press had gotten to her, that much was clear. Overnight, she went from rising brand czar to the woman who tried to humiliate her sister-in-law and lost an empire. But what the press didn't see, and what I did, was that this wasn't a fall from grace. Vivian had never built anything on grace to begin with. She had built it on borrowed power and brittle alliances. And when that power cracked, she vanished like smoke. Still, even without her in the building, I felt her in the spreadsheets, in the bloated budgets, in the vendor kickbacks, in the branded mugs and candles with her name etched beneath the company logo like a secret signature. Cleaning it up would take months. I started with the smallest room in the building, the brand archive, a windowless space where years of brochures, mood boards, and event manuals were filed like they mattered more than people. I pulled the boxes out one by one, spread them across the floor, and stared. Fake smiles, over-edited photos, generic language about heritage and excellence. It was all veneer, no soul, no story, just polish. I took a deep breath and grabbed a Sharpie. On the back of one of Vivian's signature event decks, I scribbled, "What does this brand hide, and how do we let it speak?" That became the North Star. Not redesigning the exterior, redefining the truth. By week 2, I'd hired a small creative team, outsiders all of them. Not one Whitmore on their resume. A former magazine art director named Sal, a copywriter named June, who once sued her last agency for wage discrimination, and a data analyst named Cam, who believed numbers could tell better stories than photos. They didn't dress like corporate, they didn't act like corporate, and they didn't flinch when I said, "This company buried people like us. Let's dig them out." We started by changing the voice. No more cold, omniscient press releases. Instead, we launched a weekly blog called Legacy and Progress Stories from housekeepers, gardeners, event interns. People who had worked at Whitmore Resorts for decades but were never invited to speak on behalf of the brand. And guess what? The numbers climbed. Engagement doubled in a month. Bookings went up. Investors started replying to our newsletters instead of forwarding them silently. We rebranded the image department into Visual Testimony. Our new tagline, "Designed by Honesty," lit by those who stayed invisible too long. It was radical, it was uncomfortable, and it made people in the executive tier very, very nervous. Good. At night, I'd still go home to Caleb. We were rebuilding too slowly. We didn't talk about the party, or the dress, or the fact that he once left me on a stage alone while his sister tried to bury me. But we talked about the now. About the emails he forwarded me from old friends who apologized for not speaking up. About his mother who finally called me not to say sorry, but to say, "You were right." It wasn't closure, it was motion. And motion was enough for now. At week 4, I held my first public press conference. Standing in front of a room of industry reporters, I laid out Whitmore's new brand values. Transparency over tradition, humanity over hierarchy, story over strategy. I told them we'd no longer airbrush the people in our ads, that our next major campaign would feature real employees, not actors, and that every future event would publish its real budget online, visible to vendors and guests alike. There was silence, then applause, then a reporter stood up. "Do you think Vivian will ever return to the company?" I looked straight into the camera. "I think anyone can return," I said, "but only if they're ready to do it without wearing a mask." After the press left, I sat alone in the courtyard. It was raining slightly. I didn't move. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't dared to feel. Not relief, not triumph. Belonging. Not because I'd won, but because I hadn't let them erase me. Because I stayed. Because I spoke. Because I changed something that once chewed me up into confetti and called it glamour. And because finally, the walls were listening. It was just after 6 in the morning when Roland Whitmore asked me to meet him at the southern entrance of the Cascade Trail, a path that wound through the original Whitmore property before it became a 10-resort empire. I thought it might be a formality, a symbolic stroll, a polite gesture from a man who owed me more than he'd ever say. But when I saw him standing there, not in a suit, not flanked by aides or board members, but in hiking boots and a navy windbreaker with a paper coffee cup in hand, and eyes that looked somehow smaller than the man who had once built an empire, I knew this wasn't a formality. This was confession. We walked for a while in silence. Just the crunch of gravel underfoot, the call of birds hidden in pine needles, and the occasional whir of a distant lawnmower tuning the early morning quiet. It took until the bridge to the old lakefront cabin for him to speak. "You know," he said, nodding toward the weathered beams overhead, "when I was your age, this was all I had. That cabin, this trail, and a dream I thought people would laugh at." He glanced at me. They did, by the way. Laugh. Called me a fool. Called Elaine, my wife, a gold digger for marrying a bartender with a blueprint and a borrowed suit. His voice didn't hold bitterness, just memory. But we built it anyway. Started with nothing, and then slowly it turned into something. He stopped walking, turned to face me. Then it turned into too much. I knew what he meant. Somewhere along the line, he said I stopped asking myself why I started. I just kept going. Bigger, better, faster. Until we were throwing money at chandeliers while our staff couldn't afford dental. He looked up at the trees. "I saw what Vivian did to you. I knew she wasn't ready to lead. But I was tired. I let the machinery roll over both of you." I didn't respond. Not yet. Not while his face looked like it was unraveling something he'd kept in for years. "But that night, your night when you stood on that stage, trembling but sure, tearing down every pretense we'd spent decades polishing," he paused. "You reminded me of why I started, and that it wasn't for stock prices or magazine covers. It was to build something I wasn't invited into as a young man. Something fair." He held out a folded piece of paper. "I never apologized for not stopping her. I can't change that. But I've changed the bylaws. You'll have full creative autonomy moving forward. No board approval needed for brand direction. This is yours." I took the paper. My hands didn't shake this time. "Why me?" I asked. He smiled. "Because the last time I saw someone fight like that for truth, it was me. At 29. No one believed me either. We stood there for a while, 2 generations of survivors. Different weapons, same war. Then I said the thing I hadn't let myself say out loud since the wedding. I almost left. He nodded. "I know, and I still might. I wouldn't blame you. But if I stay," I added, "I'm not just staying for the brand. I'm staying to make sure what happened to me doesn't happen again. To anyone." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "Then we start again. Not from scratch, from scars." Later that afternoon, the Whitmore board convened. It was a routine quarterly meeting, but everyone knew it wasn't. There was a hush as Caleb walked into the room. He hadn't attended a board meeting in 6 months. He had stopped sitting on panels, stopped answering PR calls. To the public, he was still Roland's handsome private son, the quiet executive who'd stepped back for personal reasons. But today something in him had shifted. He sat beside me, no distance, no polite nod, just presence. As the meeting progressed, one board member, a cousin of Vivian's, I think casually raised the idea of putting her back in an advisory role, saying the public had a short memory. Caleb stood up. His voice didn't rise, but his words cut like glass. "With all due respect, the public didn't forget. They forgave us because Lana gave them the truth. They came back because she treated them like people, not markets." He turned to the man who suggested it. "If Vivian returns, I leave." "So does she," he said, nodding to me. "And so do the stories and the numbers and the soul we've only just started to rebuild." You could have heard a pin drop. Caleb glanced around the room. For months I watched my wife stand alone. I watched her be humiliated, blamed, erased. I said nothing, and that silence, my silence was a betrayal. He looked at me. "So this is my apology, not words, action." He sat down again. That was the moment the chain broke. Not just the one wrapped around me, but the one I hadn't realized was still around him. That evening, we sat in the lobby of the very first Whitmore resort, the original, the one Roland built with scraped-up credit and a borrowed hammer. It was quieter than the newer ones. No ambient playlist, no clinking champagne, just a low hum of firewood and the occasional cough of an old radiator. Caleb passed me a glass of water. "Do you hate me?" I shook my head. I did, briefly. "Fair, but I don't now." He looked at me carefully. "Why not?" "Because you stood up, and not for show, for truth." He exhaled. "You didn't have to do that," I added. "But you did, And that makes all the difference. Outside, the lanterns along the garden path flickered as the wind picked up. I looked through the window, watching the branches sway like slow dancers. And for the first time since the dress, since the party, since the whispers and the headlines and the shadows, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes when the war is over. The kind that comes when you know who you are after the war, and you're no longer afraid of the silence. Because this time the silence isn't hiding anything. It's just quiet, and finally, I belonged in it. It was a quiet ribbon-cutting ceremony, at least compared to what Whitmore events used to be. No marble fountains, no aerial drone displays, just a wooden arch carved by a local artist, wildflowers planted by staff volunteers, and a stage made of reclaimed driftwood set at the edge of a tranquil, glassy lake. This was not the Whitmore resort of 5 years ago. This was New Earth. I stood at the center of it all, holding the dull bronze scissors. A pair of interns flanked me, both barely 23, both once on the brink of dropping out of school due to financial hardship. They now led their own sub-teams in sustainable development and community curation. Behind us stood the first structure of the Whitmore New Earth Initiative, an eco-resort powered entirely by solar and wind, filtered through natural aquifer pools and designed not for domination of the land, but for partnership with it. I didn't design it for luxury. I designed it for recovery, for justice. For those of us who were told we didn't belong unless we wore the right labels or spoke the right way or bowed to the invisible weight of pedigree. I pressed the scissors shut. The ribbon didn't fall. It drifted like silk on wind, folding softly into the breeze. Afterward, under a tent lit with warm bulbs and handmade lanterns, a journalist raised her hand. She didn't work for Vanity Fair or Forbes. She wore jeans and had a notebook that looked too full for one day. "Ms. Myers," she asked gently, "what does it feel like now, knowing that you were once publicly humiliated and now you're leading the very brand that almost broke you?" I looked at her. She wasn't trying to catch me off guard. She was trying to understand. I smiled, not the kind I had learned to wear in boardrooms. A real one, from somewhere healed. I think I began that if it weren't for that smoky gray dress, the one Vivian gave me to make me look like a fool, I wouldn't have seen the spotlight I actually needed to stand under. She nodded. Wrote that down. Didn't say a word more. I appreciated that. Later that night, I walked the trails alone. Lanterns swayed gently along the paths. A deer paused at the edge of the brush, watching me without fear. The quiet felt earned. A year ago, I was standing on a different kind of stage, in a different kind of dress, in front of hundreds of polished, judgmental eyes silenced by the weight of old money and curated cruelty. That night had ended with whispers, scandal, and rupture. But this one ended with roots and growth. Vivian was not charged with any crime. No prison. No scandal that ended her socially, at least not legally. But when she returned to the boardroom 3 months later with a bright idea and a thin apology, there was only silence, the kind that isn't cruel but deliberate. She faded. Not because I chased her out, but because truth no longer needed a villain to stand strong. The world watched what happened at that party. They saw the emails, the edited invoices, the betrayal, and they made up their own minds. She was offered a quiet consultancy role at a minor luxury brand in Europe. She took it. I haven't seen her since, but I think about her sometimes, not with bitterness, not anymore. With clarity. She taught me exactly what I will never become. The Whitmore name didn't fall apart. It evolved, and in doing so, it stopped towering over people. It opened. We launched the New Earth Initiative not just as a line of resorts, but as a culture of transparency and equity. Every employee, from landscapers to leads, had voting power on the design principles. We partnered with indigenous land stewards, with low-income art schools, with the kinds of communities Vivian once called not on brand. That phrase no longer existed in our vocabulary. Now we said, is it honest? Is it necessary? Is it kind? Those were our new brand pillars. Simple. Human. Step to 30. The camera crew waited silently as I approached the arched entrance of the first completed New Earth resort. The media team whispered last-minute adjustments. Someone handed me a walkie to confirm opening time, but I didn't respond. I reached for the old cast-iron door handle salvaged from the original Whitmore Lodge and pushed open the first guest entryway. It was early. Golden light poured through the bamboo-filtered skylights above. Dust caught in the light beams like stars, and just beyond the lobby desk, a team of young staff dressed in soft earth tones name badges etched in wood instead of plastic stood waiting. They weren't posed. They were just there, waiting, breathing, smiling, ready. I stepped across the threshold, not to prove anything, not to conquer anything, just to begin. The door didn't close behind me. It stayed open. And in that space between what I left behind and what I walked toward, there was no room for revenge, only rebirth.